we're in this process of this fourth industrial revolution with an ongoing ecological crisis and, conflict between the various levels of development in our civilization. But the truth is, we really don't have the psychological development and the ethical development to meet that technological development. So we have a gap. We have an interior gap. And so that's really what the fuck is going on. Intuition, or what they call in the Buddhist tradition, direct, non-conceptual, valid cognition, which is essentially a way of knowing things that isn't causal, right? The mind doesn't have to process itself in time to know things. It can just directly know them. In terms of developing the capacity to reincarnate at will, having the experience of being able to leave your body, being able to transcend space and time.
First question was, what the fuck's going on? So now it brings me to, so how the fuck do we do this? What an incredible honor to have Dr. John Churchill join me on this episode of the podcast. We really go deep into contemplative practices, what's going on in the world, and what direction can we go in to start to heal some of the gap that has kind of appeared in society. Dr. John has a degree in contemplative psychology, Chinese medicine, a doctoral degree in psychology, and teaches Indo-Tibetan contemplative practices with a deep initiation process for people that study with him, where it begins at a 4-year syllabus. So an incredible conversation. We go really deep, and I think you're going to love it just as much as I did having it. Before we get started, please hit subscribe. It really helps out the channel. And lastly, if you want to get involved in these types of conversations every Thursday, a group Zoom call where we dive into different areas of self-exploration. And more than anything, it's just bringing together a community of like-minded people. So if that's your thing, hit the link below and you can join that. If you want to find Dr. John, all the links are going to be below as well. All right. Thank you so much for being here. Let's get into it. Dr. John Churchill.
Sabri.
Thank you so much for being here. So I was just saying before we hit records that I first came across you last year on Aubrey Marcus's podcast. There was 3 podcasts that really stood out for me. I'd say last year is 3 of my favorite that I had to listen to repeatedly. Dr. Mark Gaffney, who we had on a few weeks ago, Robert Edward Grant, and yours. All of them are really powerful, and I think I've listened to yours 3 times. Mm-hmm. And in November, before I started the podcast, I didn't start until January. I wrote down a list of 20 of like the kind of dream people to have on, and I think it was in no particular order. Just got to put that out there. You were 5th, and so it just feels amazing, to be honest, to go from idea of wanting to start a podcast to bringing it into fruition, reality, and then being able to have these amazing conversations with people like you.
Great. Congratulations. Glad to be here.
Thank you. I appreciate it. So there was things that came up that I was pretty wowed by, that really kind of hit me, that I'd like to dive into. But before we do, could you give a little overview of yourself, your journey, and what it is that you kind of teach for people that haven't come across you?
Sure. Well, my field of study for the last 30 years has been, within the field of human development and contemplative psychology and transpersonal psychology, all the various disciplines needed to help do our psychological integration and our development and our awakening. So, that path began pretty young. I was blessed to be in a family where those sorts of questions were supported, and had an awakening experience during adolescence and spent some time with the Tibetans. And, my kind of focus of practice really is kind of in-depth contemplative practice. So human transformation over the life cycle, what's possible in terms of becoming a human being. I have a degree in contemplative psychology and a degree in Chinese medicine and a doctoral degree in clinical psychology. So I'm well studied to be able to bring an academic perspective as well as a kind of direct direct perspective. So I guess my real specialty has been the various forms of mystical psychology, and particularly that within the Indo-Tibetan tradition and the yogic traditions. But I'm pretty comfortable with the world wisdom traditions, and really that's my project, which is the question that also Mark has, which is really what is religion 2.0. And my question is maybe what's the initiatory system 2.0, meaning what does an initiatory system in the 21st century look like in terms of initiating people into the mysteries of what it means to be a human being. And of course, that study involves meditation and yogic practice, use of psychedelics, relational work, shadow work, the usual suspects. Yeah. I think that's me.
Yeah, just the light stuff then.
What's that?
Just the light stuff, nothing too heavy.
Nothing too heavy. Yeah.
So let's get the ball rolling with what the fuck's going on?
What the fuck's going on, man? That's a great question. Yeah. And in terms of like what's going on our planet, right?
Yeah.
I mean, we can look at that through all different kinds of lenses, can't we? Right? From a kind of cultural lens, systemic lens. I mean, really, we're at a meta crisis, as you well know, and your listeners know. And of course, really, that's a crisis of development, to be honest with you, at least with it from my particular perspective. The truth is that in the West, and we've been driving civilization on this planet really for the last 300, 400 years, right? In terms of the project of Western civilization or modernity, which is now a planetary phenomenon. But I think the biggest problem really is that our exterior development, our technological development, is way, way outclassed our internal development. And that's just part of the shadow of modernity, right? That modernity orients towards exteriors, to that which is measurable. And then when you add the kind of the politics, the religious politics of the West for the last 2,000 years, which was really deliberately suppressive of those kinds of psychotechnologies that we might have seen in the East. Granted, we've had a few mystics, but they tend to be suppressed and shoved away in monasteries. So really, we have this problem where we're in this process of this fourth industrial revolution with an ongoing ecological crisis and, conflict between the various levels of development in our civilization. But the truth is, we really don't have the psychological development and the ethical development to meet that technological development. So we have a gap. We have an interior gap. And so that's really what the fuck is going on. Is there's a gap between the tools that we're working with and the levels of development that we're operating from. And of course, in order to address the kind of systemic issues that we have on this planet, we need to have a level of consciousness that can function at a systemic and metasystemic level of cognition, and a level of being that is planetary in its level of connection. And people aren't there. We're not there yet, right? For all kinds of reasons. So we have a big developmental gap between where we are and really where we should be.
And is that gap because throughout the human experience, you mentioned about the kind of the human transformation over a lifetime. Is that kind of down to the fact that we were born as we're meant to be, we start to develop, and then quite early on, it seems as though the development really kind of stops, where it seems, from my observation, that people in their 40s, 50s, 60s may be no more emotionally or spiritually mature than someone who might be 20.
Yeah. I mean, our culture scaffolds us to a particular level of development. right? And we know from Western research into ego development is that is actually only halfway up the ladder. And even if we don't talk about the sacred, but we just talk about development and perspective taking, those things that are measurable, the truth is that we haven't built a scaffold, an educational scaffold to support those levels of development and cognition really necessary to address the complexity that we're in. So that's an issue. And then the other issue, of course, is that we have culturally suppressed prior levels of development that should have been better integrated into our psychology. By that I mean we've really suppressed the kind of the indigenous wisdom, right? And even the indigenous wisdom of the I mean, I'm talking here as a representative of the West, right? As a European person, those indigenous traditions of Europe and of the Middle East, right? So we also lost a band. So not only are we stuck halfway and there's further to go, we've also got stuck halfway and we haven't integrated the past. So we're trapped between the necessity for transpersonal development and the necessity for pre-personal integration. I'm kind of stuck in the middle.
Do you think with you mentioned modernity, do you think we kind of threw the baby out with the bathwater, going from kind of like modernity and post-modernity, where it seems like a lot of the spiritual kind of teachings or God has seemed to be kind of like thrown out with maybe something like the dogmatic kind of approach of religion, and it seems like we kind of got rid of all of it and abandoned all kind of spiritual developments.
Yes, yeah, exactly. I mean, many Westerners, for instance, don't even know that some of the luminaries of our culture, like Isaac Newton, for instance, were completely engrossed in the study of the spiritual sciences. So even those who were approaching the sacred from a rational and experimental point of view were kind of suppressed, right? So yeah, we threw out the baby and the bathwater for sure.
Yeah. What do you think the reason is that it has been suppressed?
I mean, that's a great question. I mean, I think developmentally over history, we have to look at the suppression that happened in different historical epochs. A little bit like if we think of Western civilization like a person, and you can have traumas at various levels of development. So if we look at the effect of Christianity, particularly over the last few thousand years, and Rome, I mean, really, a lot of these problems go back to Rome, right? So the Romans essentially eradicated the mysteries. They eradicated the Elysian mysteries, which I think they'd run for 1,000 years in Greece. The Elysian mysteries were wiped out. The Dionysian mysteries were wiped out, and the kind of initiatory systems that were still in place in the ancient world were replaced. The Romans ran a sophisticated psyops program where Christianity, which had kind of begun in my mind as an attempt of a kind of universal mystery school in the ancient world that was designed to allow the Egyptians and the Druids and the Greeks, and actually even the Buddhists, because a lot of this happened in Alexandria. So that project got co-opted by the Romans and designed into a means of controlling the empire. And so along with that then came the suppression of the feminine, right? So the suppression of the body, the suppression of sacred sexuality, the suppression of the use of medicinal plants to evolve consciousness. So that happened a couple of thousand years ago. So we had that running, and then the effect of the kind of the church as empire, which was a political empire essentially. I mean, really, the church was a continuation of the Roman Empire. and its complete suppression of anything that fell outside of its ability to control the population. And so we have that as part of our history. And then, of course, you have that transition around the Renaissance and into the Enlightenment of modernity. Now, a lot of modernity in the beginning actually was informed by the sacred. So a lot of those people in the Renaissance and during the Enlightenment were informed by the ancient traditions, were informed by the kind of the understanding of the Hermetic wisdom. But then empire repeated itself again and suppressed those dimensions of modernity. Because, of course, modernity is really about experimental, looking into, asking questions and looking into the nature of things. And that can be informed by sacred principles or not. I mean, you can have medicine that's informed by the sacred, right? You can have chemistry, biology, physics, all the discipline, all those disciplines. They're not like they are. They don't have to be just purely grounded in materialism. They can be grounded in other things as well. But there was this continued kind of political attempt to to control the population, and so we kind of had a modernity then also took on that kind of that shadowy element of control. So we've had a couple of these phases where the sacred was pushed out for the sake of political control.
Yeah, it seems as though now we're at a time where, and Mark Gaffney talks about this. We're at a time where we're in between dystopia and utopia, and it does feel like we're at an interesting time where there does seem to be empire almost kind of taking a look at psychedelics and saying, "Hang on a minute, maybe there's something to this." But
Sure.
also they want to patent
Sure.
psychedelics and talk therapy,
Absolutely.
which it's really interesting. It seems as though with this expansion of technology that we now have, things can't be suppressed the way that they were. And it kind of feels like maybe there's some last ditch attempts to try to grab onto it. Maybe the same way that, Constantine did with, kind of Christianity in 325 AD. If you
Yeah.
can't beat them, join them. It's like, okay, this psychedelic idea seems to be growing and growing. And what can we do? Let's own it.
That's right. Yeah, I mean that's going to be if we're not careful, that's where it will head, right? And on the other hand, there's a huge opportunity for an awakening. I think it really depends if we're awake at the wheel, right? If also that I mean, if we talk about psychedelics, that if not only are we into new psychedelics being developed by drug companies, but the question is also, are we into the use of those in such a way that they deepen community, right? And deepen our connection to the earth and deepen our connection to spirit. I mean, the challenge. I mean, one of the challenges of modernity where we find ourselves is just the idea of the personal journey and our personal spirituality, which was necessary at a certain point, but actually that individuality is also problematic because really what we need is people to come together, right? We need cooperation. So I'm sure empire will always attempt to co-opt everything, right? I mean that's part of being aware of the shadow is if we're aware of our own tendency to do that, if we know ourselves deep enough and we know our own right kind of our own Sith emperor inside, then it's very easy to see it outside. And if you're naive, if you're just a light bearer and you're naive to your own darkness, then either you don't see that around you, or you see it around you, but you think it is other, right? Oh, look at those bad people doing that, rather than recognizing yourself being reflected back at you. So
Yeah.
yeah, it's an opportunity for us to continue to wise up.
Yeah, absolutely. You know, there's one of my favorite quotes out of a film ever. Have you seen The Usual Suspects?
Yeah, it's been a while.
Yeah, at the end he says, "The greatest trick the devil ever played was convincing people he doesn't exist."
Right. Yeah.
And you know what you just said there about being aware of that Sith inside, so you can see
Mm,
it outwardly. I felt like that quote was so poignant. That one hit me when I heard it. I was like, "Oh my god,
mm.
it's so true,
So true. Yeah. Yeah, for sure.
powerful." So when we talk about this kind of like human transition over a lifetime, what if you were to give like an overview? What should that look like? Because, like you say, at the moment we kind of hit a point and we hit a block.
Hmm.
What would the overview be, ideally, in the ideal world, where throughout that lifetime of a human, what things do we go through to reach
Hmm.
those kind of higher levels of consciousness?
That's a great question. Um, well, I mean, part of it is, I mean, there's a number of components, right? Part of it is intellectual, right? So being exposed to new ideas, um, but development is driven by perspectives, by perspective taking, right? And so contemplative practice is a really important part of that. Um, meditative practice, because it facilitates the slow transition of somebody's psychological basis of operation. So by this, I don't mean like meditative states. I mean meditative traits. The difference between state development and trait development. Trait development meaning it's a permanent, stabilized station of where someone operates from. Right. So
Mm.
if you think of a child and an adult, even if you reflect, if you look back on where you and I have come from, and growth to where you are right now, Sabri, you've gone through these stages of development where you saw the world in a completely different way, and that was scaffolded by the culture that and the educational system. But if we get a sense that actually that process continues, right, and there are psychological mechanisms that facilitate that process. So ongoing contemplative practice through a whole lifetime, right, facilitates that. So that's like 30 to 40 minutes of meditative practice a day helps facilitate the development of new traits, new where the mind is operating from. Right, so that's expected if one engages in a proper path, right? By proper I mean something that's been well worn, where there's a contemplative psychology of it that's been used for a thousand years, or a path that's been designed by people who've studied that.
Yeah.
So that's one of so that ideally that journey is a journey that helps us move deeper and deeper in understanding what it means to be a human being and preparing for the ultimate journey of death, which, of course, paradoxically, the more one is prepared for that, the more one is prepared to actually plunge into life. Right. So that's the paradox. The more you explore death, the more you're exploring what it means to be truly alive. So that kind of process, and again, that's something that um, you don't see immediate changes. I mean, you can, but not usually. It's usually like a piece of paper every day. But of course, that stack of pieces of paper build up, and after a decade, and you look back and you're like, oh wow, like your mind is operating in a very different place, because a lot of growth is like that. A lot of real sustained growth is not something that is like a big flash, like a psychedelic trip or something, or it is the process. Just like you and I, we just kind of grew, and then suddenly you were like, oh, I'm 18 years old and I'm thinking and I'm rational and I can make decisions for myself. So that process actually continues with that same quality if it's scaffolded.
I'm still trying to get there.
Right? If it's scaffolded. So what does that then do? Well, as that sense of identity changes, it becomes, let's say, non-personal, transpersonal, and that doesn't mean that you become like Spock. It just means that the basis of operation that the mind and the heart is operating from a non-local space, if you will, and that can draw upon information from the interconnected field, right? So intuition, or what they call in the Buddhist tradition, direct non-conceptual valid cognition, which is essentially a way of knowing things that isn't causal, right? The mind doesn't have to process itself in time to know things. It can just directly know them, right? So that kind of computational process that develops as the mind and the heart mind continues to mature. And that becomes particularly important because it allows you to, know things and access information. I mean, you've probably heard of remote viewing. Well, remote viewing is kind of is like a state. But what if your mind was located in a place where you're permanently remotely viewing? That's a trait, right? So you're not doing a special technique. Just the way that the mind operates is operating from that place.
Mm.
And of course, along with that comes expanded states of concern, of compassion, of love for people, which of course is really what's needed, because a lot of these practices and traditions are actually there to help us live together. They're really about, if people are going to learn to collaborate in a deeper way, which is what we really need to do, if we're going to learn to discover kind of collective intelligence, then we need to engage in practices that actually upgrade our level of heart mind, where that would seem like a natural, a natural thing to, a natural way of operating.
Mm.
So that would be, that is expected as part of that journey. The heart expanding more, less holding on to personal story and personal personal objects, stuff. Then, of course, you have the dimension of the path, which is related to the opening up of different realms, right? As the mind begins to function beyond space and time, then there's access to other realms. And of course, you don't want people to open up access to those other realms until they've actually mastered and handled this one. And that's why an initiatory process is so important, because just haphazardly opening up the astral and opening up realms isn't necessarily a good idea unless it's kind of integrated in the view of like a lifelong path, right? And what's really necessary to address the challenges that we're facing in our lives. So does that answer some of your curiosity there?
Yeah, absolutely. What you just said about kind of accessing these like ethereal realms, or it's almost kind of bypassing some of the journey, isn't it? It feels like that ascension is where we're meant to enter, but through this initiatory journey. And I found, I first did ayahuasca about 7 years ago. And actually I had Maestro Hamilton Souther on as well.
Mm-hmm.
And I believe that you guys are connected. Is that right?
Yes, that's right. Yeah.
Yeah, wonderful. I'm actually heading out. He's invited me over to Peru, so
Wonderful.
I'll be heading there to see him. And what I found was, when I first did it 7 years ago, and it's interesting because that was at 28, 27, just about to turn 28. And I know there's this idea of like 7-year cycles through life. And that was entering a 7-year cycle. I'm just about to turn 35 next month. So that was like the beginning of this 7-year cycle. And it kind of blasted me open And that was my first experience of a state-altering drug outside of alcohol. So I'm not taking anything else. I wasn't interested in kind of recreational drugs. And I knew about ayahuasca about 11 years ago. Didn't feel drawn to it. It was actually quite a hard no. But then over time, I just kind of felt more and more of a calling towards it until I just felt, okay, I have to do this now. And that did blast me open to see the world in a way where I realized, okay, this God is not what I thought it was. God's not what I heard. God is
Right.
not this thing. There's a reason I didn't believe in God. And it's
Sure.
because what it was painted to be was not it. And I
Sure.
felt like that was the first time I really experienced it. But what I did find was, even though I actually got into kind of like, call it self-development or personal growth at quite a young age. At 14, I was listening to Wayne Dyer cassette tapes.
Yep. Mm-hmm.
And so I'd been on that path for quite some time, but I still had a lot of the deeper work to do.
Yeah, sure.
So whilst ayahuasca kind of blasted me open, it kind of gave me almost a promise of where I can go. But I had to spend really the last 7 years going a lot deeper and undoing, looking at my like attachment style and some of my early childhood things and what I experienced growing up. And it's only really been this last year, I would say, very interestingly now as I enter my next 7-year cycle, where I've started to experience things naturally that I would refer to as kind of mystical, which a year ago I would have called bullshit. It's been really interesting. So I kind of experienced this, blow my head off. Whoa,
That's
what
great.
just happens? But I couldn't stay there.
Sure. Yeah, I mean that's exactly. I mean, psychedelics have a number of functions. One of them is to give you a state preview of what a trait capacity could be. But of course, then you have to do the work to make the trait, right? And that's where the contemplative practices, that's where they come in. And the cleaning up, right? I mean, granted, if you clean up a bunch of material that's like holding you down, that's going to cause you to rise up some anyway, right? Doing the psychodynamic work.
Yeah.
And then there's the question of okay, from there, growing up even more, so to speak, over in a sustained way. And that needs, that needs a path. I mean, you don't have to, but like, why reinvent, the wagon when you can get into a Tesla, right?
Yeah. Yeah. Your journey, John. I'm kind of like curious. You said you got into you experienced an awakening as an adolescent. What did that look like for you?
Uh, well, when I think back, to childhood, I had a series of. I used to leave my body when I was. My earliest memories of leaving my body as a child and flying around the house at night, and doing yoga on my bed, maybe 4 or 5 years old. And I never thought that was something special. So then as I grew up, let's say as a kid, that was always informed in the back of my mind. Oh, like we don't really die, because if we really die, how can I leave my body and experience these things? And then that all kind of like faded, as it often does. Those are like the trailing clouds of glory that come in from a previous incarnation, the capacity that you have, and then it often just goes underground and then comes up later in adolescence, right? Um, so I mean, I was really obsessed with all the mystical traditions, and maybe 16 years old, had a pretty powerful awakening of non-dual awareness to the ground of being, and then that also included just a kind of explosion of compassion, just kind of sensing like the pain of everything on the planet. So the feeling dimension of that realization. So there's a kind of a cognitive and an awareness dimension, which is, oh, my awareness transcends time and space. And then there's the feeling implication of that, which is like, wow, the fabric. I can feel the fabric of everybody and everything. And then follow that was a kind of a cognitive awakening to, I guess, like prior understanding of these kinds of things. So I got downloads of kind of blueprints and things like that. Like I was able to pick up, I have a library of a few thousand texts, these texts from these traditions, and just the ability to understand all of that just came back as well as a kind of cognitive capacity, right? So there's a kind of an awareness dimension and a feeling dimension and a cognitive dimension, because of course our capacity for intelligence, and that doesn't necessarily mean what you know, but it means how you know it. That's also something that reincarnates, right? So your intelligence, which is like basically how you know things, your wisdom mind, which is essentially how liberated is your awareness from being fused with form, right? So how deeply can you see and experience and know yourself as being like the fundamental ground of being. And then the feeling quality, which is how deep is your love. Right. Yeah, so those, right, those kind of three dimensions kind of came online. Yeah,
Amazing. Shout out to the Bee Gees.
that's right.
Yeah, what I guess versus how that's really interesting, because I think what you said about there's a big difference between having an intellectual understanding of something versus
Mm-hmm.
like an embodiment of actually feeling it.
Mm-hmm.
How did you deal with the kind of the feeling? You said you had that like experience of like feeling the pain and the suffering. How did you deal with that?
That's difficult. I mean, I think to some extent, those of us who have that degree of sensitivity and have chosen to come back at this time, to some degree, have to have some defenses against it. Like, meaning some suppression, because the truth is it's a bit of a pigsty right now, and there's massive levels of suffering on the planet. So, you have to that has to be honestly bracketed, right? Because if you are truly impacted by it, it's difficult to function, right? I mean, I think that's really where maybe this kind of bodhisattva motivation, which is like, I'm going to fucking do something about this, right? Not just the receptive emotional quality, but also the kind of the radiatory quality, which is, okay, let's do this. Let's saddle up, giddy up, right? Let's do something, like moving forward, which is an important dimension of emotion, right? Not just receiving and not just radiating, but actually let's do something.
Let's do something about it. For people that haven't heard the term bodhisattva before, could you give it a little explanation of that, please?
Yeah. So bodhi means awakening, sattva means being. I mean, essentially, it's the bodhisattva in the Buddhist tradition, and it's a planetary archetype around spiritual warriorship, right? So you can really think of that as that became like the Jedi, right? So in the mythology that you and I grew up, that's what the Jedi Order is. If there's a planetary order, so to speak, there's a planetary tradition, a great human tradition that transcends all the various, kind of flag waving traditions. That deep human tradition that is concerned with essentially not like returning to God, but actually making our home Eden. But so the path of the Bodhisattva is very much about manifesting enlightened civilization. It's like, how do we bring God? How do we bring the sacred into Earth? Not where is the sacred? The Bodhisattvas already answered that question. They know, you've tasted the sacred, you know that it exists. But one kind of motivation is, I know the sacred exists, let's get out of here as quickly as possible to somewhere else and experience it. Or I know the sacred exists, why the fuck doesn't it manifest itself? Okay, let's make a world and bring that down. Right? So the Bodhisattva path is very much a non-dual path of sacred duality. And what I mean by that is that your and my growth is dependent upon how much you deeply engage in the transformation of the world. Because the world isn't separate from us. So to the extent that we are deeply, compassionately, erotically engaged in transforming the world as ourselves, then also our personal journey unfolds. Right? So it's not like our personal journey is separated from the journey of the whole. Right? So if we're going to get to a class 1 civilization, which if we don't get to, we're doomed, it means that we have 200, 300 years to push this to a place of this planet, to a place of integration and a place of harmony and beauty. And that Bodhisattva path is a path of warriorship in the sense of we have to engage the world, which means you're going to have to rub up against the forces of darkness. But actually that rubbing creates heat, and that heat transforms the Bodhisattva even more, and they grow and mature in relationship to leaning into the pressure rather than moving away from it kind of and just having a little retreat space. Right? So it's obviously retreat can be a huge part of that, going into the mountains for weeks and sometimes even years on end. But the Bodhisattva path is really that Jedi path of full engagement in the world, in alleviating suffering, whether that suffering manifests itself psychologically or in health or systemically or culturally. What is your job to do? Right? I mean, each of us have a soul purpose. And that sole purpose isn't just to realize God or realize the sacred, it's also to manifest something. Right? Some people are really good at maths. Some people are really good at human relationships. Some people are good at the arts. All of those within kind of bodhisattvic culture are understood to be different dimensions of the sacred. Right? So every person is expressing a quality of the sacred that needs to be brought together in culture. So it's a model of awakening and of enlightenment that is planetary, that is inclusive, right? That includes the mind and the heart and the body and sexuality and the whole gamut, rather than thinking that the sacred is somewhere else.
Yeah, and I guess that was kind of some of the a lot of the ideas of our dear friend Yeshua, and for people that don't haven't heard that before, Jesus was really a lot of what he said was kind of finding God within, and you don't have to go to the synagogue to find, you don't have to go to this place, it's within. And
well, there's that, plus where the Roman psyops came in those stories was Yeshua saying, give unto Caesar Caesar's. If you read the subtext in a lot of the Gospels, there's a very pro Roman subtext, and that subtext was inserted as a way of pacifying the people. Pay your taxes. Don't start an alternative financial system. Don't go crypto. Go central banking. Right. So yes, but still, there's still even in Christianity a kind of world-denying flavor to it, right? As opposed to the truth is that we all need to go on a journey.
Yeah.
Right? That the world needs to change, right? As opposed to, where Jesus is saying the kingdom of God is here. Yes, the kingdom of God is here, and it needs to be manifested.
Yeah.
Right. And to manifest it does mean that maybe you say to Caesar, fuck off, Caesar. Actually, you're not going to get my money. So that's a little bit more of the Bodhisattva. Now, granted, Jesus went into the temple and threw over the moneylenders.
Yeah.
Right. But then still still pay up to Caesar. So that there's those kind of double binds in Christianity that need to be worked through.
Yeah. Yeah, that makes sense. So, the idea of, I mean, I've recently only came across the idea of the Bodhisattva vow, and the idea that you have like repeated lives where, if you're a spiritual warrior, each time you're coming back, you're the spiritual warrior. Like, could
Sure.
you highlight it? I've only heard that very briefly. I don't know much about it at
Yeah.
all.
Well, the first thing is just mythically. So even before we take that idea as somehow being kind of cosmologically correct, let's just put that aside. And if we just look at it kind of mythopoetically, meaning the stories we tell about ourselves and about who we are have a profound impact on our consciousness, right? The brain believes what it is you imagine and what it is you tell yourself. So the first thing is you've got to be very careful about the story that you tell yourself, that it's an empowering story, the most kind of empowering story, so that you can face the challenges of the world that you're facing. In that sense, that your personal narrative, to some extent, is a skillful means, right? Meaning how you see yourself in the Buddhist tradition is an important part of practice, and the story that you tell yourself is an important part of practice. So what I mean by that is even the story of multiple lifetimes. So if we were to take you and we were to just take you and pick you up right now and drop you 300 years ago, and to get a sense of who you are right now and what you might be doing then, and pick you up and drop you another 300 years, and just kind of go back like that, and just get a sense of us knowing you as you are, because the truth is people don't change that quickly. Like, if we could like place you back through history, let's go, like, give yourself 200, maybe 3,000 years. So if you just drop yourself in these historical moments of time, what do you envision and imagine that you'd be up to? How do you know? Well, you're kind of up to it right now, because as I said, people change slowly. So the important thing about that is it gives you a sense of mythology and a sense of story that is grounded and rooted in deep time, rather than just Sabri, that you're just this thin veneer on a bunch of dead guys. If those dead guys are also you, if your story penetrates deeper into the past, it gives you a deeper sense of like, I'm really behind what I'm doing. Why? Because I've been doing this for a while. Right? So now, whether that's true or not, the truth is, even the story you tell yourself about Sabri isn't true anyway, right? I mean, most of the story that people telling about themselves is made up. So before we even go into like the reality, the importance of establishing a deep sense of meaning in the past, because those were the lessons that you and I went through. These are the lessons of history, right? If you don't understand the lessons of your own sacred history, right? If you don't have a sense of where you might have been 1,200 years ago, and to the extent that you do, you begin to get a story of your story. Now, even if that isn't true, it's still your story, because of those are still people like yourself who struggled with the things that you're struggling right now. But it's a little bit different to struggle that when you got the Spanish Inquisition bearing down on you, right? It's a little different. So that's the first thing, that is an important exercise in and of itself, to inform you about who you are. Because of course, you and I contain all of that history within us anyway. Yeah. Then we can turn to the future, and then we can also ask ourselves, well, what kind of projects are worthwhile investing in that are going to give fruition 300 to 400 years in the future? Now, if you don't take 300 and 400 years in the future personally, then you're just going to serve yourself. On the other hand, if the vision is larger than yourself, now these higher stages of development, much like the painting behind you, right? Those higher stages, one of the measures of like if somebody functioning at a higher trait is also how they see time. If are there somebody who's making decisions based on the quarter, like the next 3 months, the year, 10 years, 25 years, 100 years, 400 years, or 1,000 years. Now, you can train yourself to make decisions based on the fact that 1,000 years matters, right? Now, when you do that, you're going to open up and you're going to suddenly be interested in a bunch of information and a bunch of thinkers in medicine and art and who are thinking like that. And guess what? They'll be the cutting edge of humanity. It doesn't mean that you don't think about brushing your teeth in the morning, but it does mean that you understand these gears, right? These are gears. Now, so this is even the idea that reincarnation isn't a reality. But then, if you then bring in the really high, contemplative tech, and of course our culture lacks that, but the Tibetans have like super high tech in terms of actualizing this kind of stuff, right? In terms of developing the capacity to reincarnate at will, having the experience of being able to leave your body, being able to transcend space and time. This, the contemplative curriculum. Now, granted, you don't know because let's say you're just beginning that curriculum. However, if your mentors are 20 years ahead of you and they are more ethical, more responsible, more courageous, and more engaged than you are, and they're doing these practices, then you begin to develop trust, right, in lineage, like trust, because that's how it works. You need your elders. You can't do it by yourself. If you try and educate yourself, you're going to end up, educating yourself with your peers.
And it feels as though, especially now, and maybe this was different some generations ago where elders were actually respected, and even within the family, now, the elders in the family are kind of almost like, oh, so-and-so, like not kind of revered with any kind of honor or respect. And I think actually with that, I think even the people that are the elders see themselves as being kind of useless now that they're old, now that the body isn't as physically capable.
Sure.
It's almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy. And it seems like it's really important to find these elders potentially outside of the family home. And, one of the things for me that, I said I started listening to the Wayne Dyer and Deepak Chopra and Zig Ziglar when I was like 14.
Mm-hmm.
I started doing martial arts when I was 13. And I mean, I ended up owning a martial arts school all throughout my 20s. But my instructors, that's what they were doing. And that wasn't happening at home.
Right.
The narrative at home, the level of consciousness was different. And I'm seeing these people that I respected, that were, really accomplished martial artists, that were also doing well within business. And I saw this and I thought, okay, this makes a lot of sense. I want some of this. What are you guys doing? And
sure. That's right.
And I wanted to follow the path.
That's right. So that's got to do with one of the shadows of postmodernity has been the deconstruction of all hierarchies.
Mm.
Now, granted, we've talked about some of these dominator hierarchies, like the church and things like that, which have been problematic. But the term hierarchy, comes from the Greek meaning sacred order, sacred architecture. So what happens when you throw out hierarchy, you throw out initiatory systems, you throw out the belief that there can be people who are more authentically developed in their wisdom and love and capacity than you are. And this is one of the messages that the postmodern empire wants you to believe. It wants you to believe that there is no hierarchy, that there is no natural hierarchy, that there's no, and again, hierarchy here means that there are no martial artists who've been practicing 30 years more than you have. You'll never catch up with someone who's been practicing 40 years more than you. It's just not going to happen. And right. And so weaving back to that Bodhisattva ideal is the understanding of wow, well, who could you be in 300, 400 years time? If you continue on this career track and taking that to be real, right? Taking that to be real. And on the other hand, understanding that it's a narrative, but when you back that up with the contemplative tech, So, you start with the ayahuasca, you have experiences, and then you begin to meditate and you begin to have experiences, and then the mind begins to be able to function transtemporally. So you begin to be able to tap into telepathic knowledge that is like, which is about what's going on in the future. And slowly but surely, you live into that reality, right? That's the importance of a story, right? Importance of a narrative is you grow into it. So the Bodhisattva tradition is, it provides a path for us into our future that empowers us. And also like encourages us like, hey, yes, we're, there's going to be a bit of a fight.
I love what you said
Right?
about. I love what you said about 300 to 400 years into the future. And as you were saying it, that was one of those moments where a light bulb pinged for me. And I don't know if you saw, I was grinning like a Cheshire cat. And it's almost like I felt it in my body of this, oh, wow, yeah, that really changes the idea of purpose
Purpose.
and also the level of thinking. That really hit me when you just said that, as that idea of, holy shit, like, yeah, this isn't just about now, this lifetime, what I can do for little me and the people around me. It's what can I do for humanity in 300 or 400 years. And
paradoxically though, like, and then who do you become when you do that? Because actually you then become personally, you actually become who you want to become. You will fully become that, right? Because you then want a world that is of deeper truth and goodness and beauty. So it's not like you're going to not take care of the self. Actually, manifesting more beauty, more goodness and truth becomes the path, right? You're then building. You're then building it. You're then changing the world. Which if you're tapped into a level of purpose that believes that that's real, then like all of this, the kind of the depression and the meaninglessness and the kind of, oh, I'm not quite sure how we're going to get out of this problem, all of that begins to drop away because you're tapping into a level of energy that has already solved the problem. And you're aligning with the other souls on the planet who are aligned with that mission, right? So these are the people who are like, yes, there is something worth dying for, right? Because like that's an important, what's worth dying for? Because guess what? You are dying for it. Like you're going to die. So you might as well find something that's worth dying for, particularly then if that which is worth dying for is a path of immortality. Like there is no, like it's just going to keep going. So then all of that on this is all kind of the motivational tech, right? You have contemplative tech, which is like meditative technology, and then you have motivational technology, which is like how do you get this animal and its chemistry pumped up for a 70-year journey, right? And how do you get yourself in a state so we can accomplish amazing things? You're not going to accomplish amazing things if you don't have a mindset, that a peak performance mindset. Yeah.
What you said then about finding something worth dying for, the thing that immediately came up was that's the moment you find something to really start living for.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly. Yeah. Particularly if it's, yeah. Sorry, go ahead.
I was going to say, I know there's something within me that feels a calling to that. Like I can feel it and that's why I think when you said the thing for 300 to 400 years away, something in me lit up. It wasn't in my mind. I felt it in my body.
Sure.
I felt it here. And not like an egoic thing. Is the way that an acorn yearns to become an oak tree.
Sure.
Not because it's got a big ego that thinks I can be great, but it's almost like there's this.
Well, you want to, right? And if the story that we live in post-modernity and modernity is that's not going to happen, so then people give up. People give up because, oh, it's not possible. like that there aren't the means to actually become who I really am inside, and then they give up.
Yeah. And it
Right.
feels like there's more and more separation now, even with like things, if you think about how we used to be part of tribes, and it seems as though what you said about you start to align with people that are on a similar path. I think that's really important because I'd say for me personally, I do feel that. And whilst I do have some of my soul family that I feel really blessed to have around me, I don't necessarily feel like there's the shared vision of, maybe apart from like one person, that idea of like, how do we change the fucking world? Like, seriously,
Sure.
how do we do this? And I know
Yeah.
sometimes, and I don't know if this happens, if this was orchestrated by Empire to want us to be just suppressed and watching Netflix and eat bullshit food and watch porn 1,000 times a day or whatever it might be. But it's like it completely keeps you from accessing even that level of vision and almost connecting and finding the people. It
Sure.
feels like
Well, I
this.
mean, think about why would people not want to do ayahuasca?
Mm,
It's fucking scary. Can be. Right. I mean, the thing is, is if you engage a level of motivation that is like deeper than you are, like that is, if you engage that, then it's going to pull everything up that needs to be faced in order for that reality to happen. We
mm,
live in a time where people like to be comfortable, right? So, so we've even lost that kind of warriorship that even maybe our grandfathers would have had, which is like, pull your socks up, man. And, those dimensions of the sacred masculine, which were actually healthy, have been kind of eroded. So this has got to do with sacred masculine, right? I mean, and so actually the sacred masculine is more, there's so much emphasis around the sacred feminine, which rightly so, for God's sake, because it's like, look at our culture.
yeah.
But, the sacred masculine there is to defend the sacred feminine. It's like, in the sense of to protect it against, to protect beauty. And I don't mean women here. I just mean the beauty of nature against the forces that want to destroy what is, beautiful and good and true. Um, so, that's a dimension of it, right? Meaning, if we're comfortable, if we're happy being comfortable, then asking questions that are going to make us uncomfortable is going to be difficult.
Yeah. So, what do we do? How do we do it?
What to do?
The first question was, what the fuck's going on? So now I guess it brings me to, so how the fuck do we do this?
It's a great question. I mean, I think we're at. I mean, obviously, there are all kinds of ways that people are, addressing that, that issue. The issue. I think the thing is to ask oneself, what is yours to do, right? What's mine to do?
Mm,
Um, I mean, it does seem to me that at least, in my, my question around the sacred and the kind of and the humanities, because I think the tech side is actually rolling quite nicely. That's part of the problem. The issue is my mind is, we need to bring online more of this interior technology,
yeah.
and and to do that you actually need to come together, because really what needs to happen is we need to start building, this, what does religion 2.0 look like, right? Because as long as it's a bunch of spiritual, not religious people, and by spiritual what we mean is people doing their own thing and having their own journey, you don't build enough impact, you don't build enough momentum, you don't build enough power, right, to be able to then actually transform the system. So part of empire likes people to be spiritual, and have their own little spiritual trip and go on and do ayahuasca and keep everything in personal development, as long as it doesn't actually become something, right? And so just like people use the term conspiracy theories in politics and then label everything, they use the term cult in religion and just label everything, right? But as Jamie Wheel puts it, we need to actually learn how to build ethical cults. Like, we need to learn how to build a new religion. I mean, a religion is a cult, right? But not but not the kind of cults that, oh my God, no. Like, what does a third tier 21st century like religion look like that has the resources and the manpower and the training and to be able to bring people together in the sacred and educate people in the sacred and hold all of the insights of modernity and post-modernity and post-postmodernity in order to help bring people together. Because religion's function is the third place, right? You have work, you have home, and you have this third place, which was a place where people met outside of work. And of course, because that's eroded, we no longer have that place to really build culture. So that's, in my mind, that's the project. And I think Mark would agree with me as well. That's the project at hand, right? And of course, to do that and to do that the right way is a difficult challenge. But I think that's, at least in my department of hierarchy, like in my department of serving, that's what we're working on. Somewhere else, they're probably working on 0-point energy. Somewhere else, they're probably working on longevity, right? Somewhere else, they're working on the financial piece. But all of the religious piece, right, from religare, meaning to bind ourselves into reality. That's what religion means. It means to connect yourself. We need a new way of doing that, and a way that will enable people to walk that path with integrity over the next 50, 60, 70 years of their life.
Yeah. Wow.
So that's what I'm up to, and my colleagues as well.
Yeah, it's powerful. Like I said, I know for me personally, I wonder how many other people are out there feeling like this. Like there is that yearning and almost that feeling to want to connect. Of how do I, almost like there's so much I can do on my own, but almost like it feels like there's an Avengers Assemble that.
That's right. It's happening. The Avengers are getting assembled. And the question is, you just have to be like, do you want to play in that game? Right? Yeah, it's an elitism, but it's an elitism that everyone's invited to.
Yeah.
Right? As you said, like, if I just want to stay at home and like watch my porn and eat my curry, fine, go ahead.
Yeah.
Right? Yeah.
But everyone's welcome. Like we can all go, we can all do this. But no, like, yeah, if that isn't your path, you don't feel called to the path, then you can only be where you're at.
That's right. So it's developmentally appropriate. If this is, these are things that are big issues for people, then they're going to be looking for those opportunities. I think the challenge my generation has is at least in the field of religion, spirituality, human development, the real challenge now is bringing the leaders together to build systems, to build organizations that can actually handle quality capacity training. Right? That's going to be the challenge. Because as long as it's individual teachers, for instance, that's not going to work, right? You need a team of Avengers, because the guru game and a lot of the problems that come from just having like one teacher at the top of the pyramid, right? These are the things we have to navigate. But I'm full of trust that we're going to work it out, because simultaneously in the future it is worked out. So then we just have to work out, how did we work it out? Right? And of course, that does involve at some point like significant changes in one's life. But the truth is, the hero's journey, at some point you have to leave the village, right? That wasn't just a metaphor, right? Like, it's not, this is like the personal growth shadow is like, oh, the hero's quest, the hero's journey is a metaphor. No. Yes, it's a metaphor. And actually, it is an actual hero's journey that does involve making something happen.
Yeah, you've got to leave the house.
You got to leave the house. I mean, you can't just leave. Well, you can. You can't just leave. You can like stay at home and take your psychedelics and think you're going on a journey. But the journey that we need to go on right now, all of us, does involve actually changing something.
Yeah.
Right? Changing the systems that we live in.
One
and
of
of
the
course, yeah.
Sorry, go on.
Well, I was going to say, and we don't know what that looks like, meaning it's emergent. And so to handle emergent wisdom, that takes the ability to handle the unknown. And to be able to handle the unknown, you have to be comfortable with death, because that's what the fear of death is, right? So if you want to engage with the emergent, if you want to be engaging with what's arising or what needs to happen and building that, then it takes that quality of bodhisattva warriorship that is okay with handling, like, not knowing.
Yeah, I think that actually ties back into what you said about why would people not want to do ayahuasca. And it is that fear of the unknown, but it's
Sure.
like, well, do you have the faith? Do you have the faith? I mean,
Yeah.
you know, the third time that I did ayahuasca, about, I don't know, when I first did it, I then did it every 6 months for a couple of years. So I did it once, kind of did some work, some integration. 6 months later, did it again, and did it like that. And the third time, I was going through some difficult stuff at the time in my life, and how things lined up. There was like this. There's anxiety around. There's a specific date, and then on that date, the shaman that I knew said there's a ceremony taking place on that date, and it was like in 2 days' time, and I'd not eaten for like 2 days because I had this anxiety that I'd never experienced before, and I was like, okay, I guess I'm already fasted. Like, it's in 2 days. It's on. Okay, I'm in. But when I got there, I remember saying, I think I'm going to get dragged across the coals. I think I'm going to go to hell. But if that's where I need to go, let's go.
That's great.
And a lot of people, and I understand why people wouldn't want to do ayahuasca. I get it.
Sure. Sure. Yeah. I mean, that's also where being grounded in a tradition of training, meditative training, where you have some access to something larger than oneself before one even engages in those in those medicines, is super helpful.
Yeah.
But again, that takes the willingness to do the work, right? It takes the willingness to sit down in a chair every day for half an hour and do your internal kata, right? Like, if you don't learn your forms, you're not going to develop capacity. If you don't sit down and every day do the work, you won't develop a heart that is deeply interconnected and fearless, right? If you want to be fearless, then you have to do those practices that help develop fearlessness.
That's one of the things that I really liked, when I kind of first heard you on Aubrey's podcast, and then I took a look at your website. And am I right to say that your teachings are over a 4-year period?
Yeah, we have a 4-year curriculum, which is basically, in my mind, that's like the liberal. That gets you in the doorway, right? That's like, what is it that you need to know that you could make a good decision about making a 60-year journey, right? But
it made so much sense to me. I mean, like, there's nothing wrong with doing the weekends events to have some new awareness. But when I saw that immediately, I thought, well, within martial arts, would kind of generally say to someone, in striking and kickboxing, or would say, somewhere like 4 to 6 years to get the
sure,
black belt. But when you get your black belt, that's not the end. That's just now. Okay, now you've got the basics.
Now you know how to learn. Now you know how to learn. Yeah, it's the same thing. And of course, we're talking about the sacred. We're talking about your mind changing. You go to university for 4 years. I mean, I went to probably university for 10 years. Like, you think that you're going to learn something based on doing workshops? That's how, like you didn't learn. Like, that is not how learning works.
Yeah.
Right? Like learning, like real deep learning, how to become a human being, and then learning how to grow and how to engage these practices in the right way. You at least need a liberal arts degree, which is a basic minimum 4 years, right?
Mm.
As you said, like 6 years of getting to the place um, of learning how to learn. And of course, the truth is the people that come to us have already they've already done a bunch of years, right? So they've already done the 2 years plus at least, right? They've already done that to add up to that 6 year period. So that in my mind is it's enough for people to get a deep sense of how also we grow over time. Right, like to be engaged in a container, a year, 2, 3, 4 year container, and you get to see, oh, that's the speed of the kind of growth that I'm interested in, right? Like, oh, it works at this speed, because you won't track it workshop to workshop, but it's tracked year to right. Then you see it, and if it's sustained, also if the workshops are different workshops, you're not going to see it because you're jumping from this thing to this thing to this thing to this thing. Sustained effort on, like continuing, that's what leads to the kind of growth that we're interested in.
Yeah, absolutely. I think it's one of the beautiful things about the martial art and the belt system, because it does allow you to kind of go through these
Yeah,
like checkpoints.
that's right. Well, that's the initiatory system.
Yeah.
So when I'm saying building an initiatory system, the initiatory system, for instance, that was built to help move from the Renaissance to the Enlightenment, that was what the Freemasons built an initiatory system that basically modernity was built to some extent by the Freemasons. But once we got to modernity, then that structure is actually now, it's no longer like serving, because all it's doing is it doesn't have a use, right? So we have to essentially construct an initiatory system similar to that initiatory system that allows us to transition from one time to another time, right? And to do that, you need grades. You need educational grades. You can't, like, if you and I are going to sit down and we're going to go to war together, right? You want to know that the person next to you has a level of internal capacity. They've had a level of training, and that includes interior training. Now what we're saying is, hey, interior training is particularly important to handle this coming fourth industrial revolution. So I want to know, and you want to know, that the person opposite you shares enough deep value and has enough deep experiences over time, tested by the black belts ahead of them, that you know that person is 100% dependable. Then, for instance, we might get to a new economic system, because if we're going to build DAOs, right, decentralized autonomous organizations, I want to know that you have a level of ethics, that if I put my money in that you're not going to just like drain it, right? So all of these kind of future tech, a lot of them is also dependent upon us knowing each other and knowing the friends, whether your friends have had that level of education or not.
Yeah.
I think it's helpful.
Yeah, I think what you said about DAOs is it's the same thing, isn't it? Like you said, the technology has evolved, but for the level of consciousness operating it, it's kind of like we've got the iPhone, what's the most recent? iPhone 14, but we've got the Commodore 64 software trying to operate it.
That's right. And so that has to be designed. So, like one of my functions is like architecture and design of what an initiatory system might look like.
Mm.
And then within that, you have particular layers, and then we have specialists who can design that particular journey. But the architecture itself involves multiple disciplines. It involves bringing together everything from psychedelics to human sexuality to cognitive work to shadow work to meditative work. all of that fits into an organizational structure. That's the task ahead of us, right? That, when it's built, can then be scaled. And of course, that's how you build an army.
John, what you just said then about the initiatory system, I want to share something with you. Back in November, I felt like I went through somewhat of like a wave of awakening of sorts. And I had this maybe 2-week period where I was having these really profound dreams where things were coming to me during my dreams. It was talking about the chakra system and how certain things aligned, for example, like attachment theory with root and maybe like Carl Jung's work and like shadow integration with sacral. And it was talking
Yeah,
about how there are all these different kind of systems that people think work individually, but actually it's meant to be a process that we go through. And again, almost leading to the belt system with martial arts, is it not a coincidence that it pretty much mirrors the chakras of like red, orange, yellow, green, blue,
that's right.
purple? And
Yeah.
it was these really detailed dreams about that. And this is a side tangent, but I think it's a fun story because I've not told it on the podcast before. I'd watched a Robert Edward Grant thing on Gaia, and he was talking about Da Vinci and how he'd write a mirror image. And I said to my girlfriend at the time, I was like, "Wow!" I was like, "That's wild." I was like, I can barely write normally," and I said, "That's insane." And I went
Yeah.
to sleep that night, and I had this dream where, Yeshua comes to me and says, "There's nothing that a human has ever conceptualized that you can't, because the same consciousness that creates them is the one consciousness that flows through you." I woke up that morning, I sat down with my journal, I then wrote an entire page mirror image without thinking about it. Did the entire thing, held it up to the, and I didn't 100% know how accurate it was going to be, held it up to the window the
Amazing.
other way around, and there was the full paragraph talking about what I'd watched last night, this dream about that I had, and it's just wild.
That is wild. Well, that gives a lot of hope when we think, well, what happens when we do that, right? Like when we like when the collective, when there's enough people together on the same with the same question, focusing on the same goal. I mean, of course, like there's a lot to be hopeful for.
Mm. One of the last things I wanted to ask, in fact, most of this is free flows, but one of the things that I do want to touch on, because I thought it was really powerful when I heard it, and I'd like the listeners of this podcast to be able to hear this. It was about the narrative filtering system and the somatic filtering system.
Remind me. I don't remember what I was saying.
So you basically said how there's a narrative filtering system where
Uh-huh.
what we're experiencing in life, we have our own internal narrative and how we filter
Sure.
things, but also there's the somatic filtering system, which is kind of like how, from what I understood, is how the nervous system almost filters things out, and that creates our perception and experience of everything that we go through.
Okay, sure. I mean, I don't remember the exact part of that conversation, but I mean, again, this has got to do with how you. Part of it is like how you imagine yourself to be, right? So this has got to do like your self-image and my self-image limits the information that comes in, right? And that limits both the kind of cognitive information that we're picking up because our conditioning is related to pattern recognition, right? So we just block a bunch out. But when it comes to the body, what you imagine the body to be limits what your experience of it is, right? So if you're imagining the body, if you envision the body to be a machine made of meat, then that's what you're going to experience. If you understand that the body extends infinitely deep, right? If you understand, if you really understand the body is made of electrons, and electrons, right? They're made of all the way down until the body becomes complete space. Then you begin to experience the body as a blissful field of openness because you're no longer formatting it through the very self-image you have about what a body is, right? So we limit our experience of embodiment because essentially embodiment begins with the physical body but then extends extends all the way out, right? If we have an electromagnetic field at the heart center, which extends out, I don't know, 5-10 feet. I mean, it's measurable, and then whenever the devices get more sensitive, they measure further and further out how far our biomagnetic field extends. Well, if that biomagnetic field isn't just energy, but it's energy awareness, and if you understand that energy awareness, then you begin to understand that actually your body extends beyond you, that you are that biomagnetic field. And of course, when you back that up with meditative practices, right? So when you go deep into meditation and you dissolve all the boundaries of the body, and then your body just becomes unbounded openness and kind of bliss, because it's no longer like held together by like, oh, I'm a body and I'm going to get eaten by a dinosaur, right? To the extent that those kind of, which granted, there's a level of operating where that's useful. There's a level of operation where I am a physical body and this is my fist and that's going to go like that. That's a useful level of functioning, relatively, right? Oh, I know Kung Fu. This is a good thing, right? Neo wouldn't have been Neo if he didn't know Kung Fu. But there's a deeper level where Neo recognizes, oh, wow, this whole thing is a creation of mind. That's where I can jump from one building to another building.
Mm.
And whilst we can't jump from one building to another building, but if you already are that other building, you don't even need to jump there, right? So if the body extends indefinitely out, it's limited by the story that you tell yourself about what the body is.
Mm-hmm.
Now that has to be backed up with practices to make that a realization. But I think that maybe that's what we were talking about with Aubrey was that understanding.
Yeah, amazing. No, thank you for that.
Yeah.
John, the people that want to find you, I will find you.
Good luck.
I was going to say, what is there a platform or a place that's best?
Yeah, thank you. So right now, if people go to karunamandala.org, would you post that do you have it on the notes? Right, karunamandala.org. That's where our 4-year program is held, and we have another cohort beginning in January. Right now I don't tend to work with people one-on-one unless they're already in that cohort, right? Because, and frankly, I want to see people do a bunch of training. There's no point training with the master if you're still learning to stand, you know what I mean? Like learn your basics. It's like, so karunamandala.org. And people are welcome. Come train with us. We have people training from all over the world.
And so did you say the next kind of cohort starts in January? So
that's right. Yeah. So sign up. That there's information. I think we beginning to have I think there's not a page up yet for next year, but there will be up shortly. But if people sign up to the mailing list, we'll send stuff out when it comes out.
Amazing.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for being here.
It's been a pleasure. Well, thank you for doing what you're doing. Yeah, it's important.
Yeah, amazing. Thanks, John.
Yeah, my pleasure.
All right. Thank you so much for watching. I really hope you loved the episode. If you did, feel free to leave any comments with anything that came up for you. If you haven't done yet, please hit like and subscribe because it really helps out the channel. All right. Thank you so much for being here, and I look forward to seeing you on the next one.